December 20th, 1944. The Ardennes Forest, Belgium. The snow fell in thick curtains, blurring the boundary between earth and sky until the world itself seemed erased. The temperature had dropped to 14 degrees Fahrenheit overnight, freezing breath into crystals, turning rifle oil into sludge. Private First Class Levi Kincaid crouched behind a snow-covered ridge, his gloved fingers wrapped around something small and round. It was a compass, not the military-issue lensatic compass carried by officers and forward observers, but a child's toy, a scratched brass disc no larger than a silver dollar with a glass face fogged by cold. His aunt had pressed it into his palm at the Bangor train station 9 months earlier. "Something to keep you pointed home," she had whispered. The other men in his platoon had laughed at it. Sergeant McKellar had called it a cereal box prize. Another private had asked if it came with a decoder ring. But right now, that toy compass was the only reason Levi knew exactly where he was, and precisely where the enemy would appear in less than 90 seconds. From somewhere down the narrow forest road came a sound that turned breath to ice. The deep, grinding thunder of Panzer engines, not the lighter rumble of American Shermans, but the heavier, darker roar of German armor. 2 tanks, maybe 3. The sound shook the frozen earth and tightened every chest in the platoon. Levi glanced at the compass once more, checking the bearing he had measured an hour earlier in the fading light. 196 degrees southwest. The bend in the road would force the lead tank to expose its entire left flank for 5 critical seconds. That was where the ambush would spring. He closed his eyes and saw it all in his mind. The shallow mines buried under snow, the burned-out jeep staged around the curve to look like a hasty American retreat, the 57mm anti-tank gun hidden in the brush, its barrel aligned with the exact angle he had calculated using that stupid toy compass. Levi took one slow breath, the cold air searing his lungs, and whispered just loud enough to hear himself, "Let's see if it's still stupid now." 4 days earlier, on the morning of December 16th, 1944, Adolf Hitler had rolled the dice on his last great gamble. Over 300,000 German soldiers, backed by more than 400 tanks and assault guns, surged forward through the Ardennes Forest in an operation codenamed Wacht am Rhein, Watch on the Rhine. The objective was audacious, impossible even: split the Allied armies in 2, capture the vital port of Antwerp, force the Western Allies to negotiate a separate peace. The Germans struck where the Allies least expected it, through a quiet sector held by green troops and exhausted divisions rotating out of combat. The American First Army's Roman 8 Corps, spread thin across 85 miles of forested ridges and narrow valleys, bore the brunt of the assault. Entire regiments were overrun in the first hours. Communication lines were severed. Headquarters lost contact with frontline units. Panic rippled through command posts as reports flooded in of German paratroopers dropping behind American lines, of English-speaking commandos in stolen uniforms sowing confusion, of massive Tiger and Panther tanks rolling through morning mist like steel ghosts. What the Germans called an offensive, the American soldiers caught in its jaws would come to know as the Battle of the Bulge. Named for the deep salient the attack drove into Allied lines. But what Hitler's planners had not fully accounted for was the terrain itself. The Ardennes was not tank country. Its roads were narrow, winding, and few. Its forests were thick and dark. Its valleys were steep, and its rivers swollen with winter rain. Every bridge became a choke point. Every crossroads became contested ground. Every hour of delay rippled through the German timetable, like cracks spreading through ice. The offensive depended on speed, on reaching the Meuse River before Allied reinforcements could react. But speed in the Ardennes was measured not in kilometers per hour, but in hours per kilometer. And in that brutal arithmetic of time and space, small groups of American soldiers, often cut off and outgunned, discovered they could trade their lives for minutes, minutes for hours, hours for the survival of entire armies. Levi Kincaid's position, a nameless bend in a nameless road between the towns of Houffalize and Bastogne, was one of hundreds of such places where the fate of nations would be decided not by grand strategy, but by cold geometry and human will. Before the war, Levi Kincaid had never been more than 50 miles from the mill town in Maine, where he was born. His father worked timber. His mother ran a diner that opened before dawn. Levi was not the loudest in a room or the strongest on a job site, but he possessed a quality rarer than strength or charm. He had precision. As a teenager, Levi worked summers as a surveyor's assistant, pacing property lines through dense Maine woods with a notebook, a folding map, and a cheap brass compass. While other boys chopped wood or hauled hay, Levi learned to read terrain the way others read books. He learned that in unfamiliar country, instinct would get you lost, but a bearing taken carefully and followed faithfully would bring you home. He learned that small errors in direction compounded into miles of mistake. He learned to trust numbers over feelings, angles over assumptions. When he enlisted in the army in early 1943, Levi was assigned to a combat engineer company. His job was to build bridges, clear mines, and repair roads. But his real gift was navigation. His platoon sergeant, a hard-bitten veteran of North Africa named McKellar, called it compass voodoo. That compass, the one Levi carried through France and into Belgium, was not military issue. It wobbled if you moved too fast. The needle stuck sometimes in cold weather. But Levi liked its simplicity. It was honest. It pointed north or it did not. There were no excuses, no complications. When other men joked about it, Levi smiled and said nothing. He knew what they did not. That in cloud-covered forests where the sun never showed its face, where maps were outdated and roads were unmarked, that tiny wobbling needle was worth more than a lucky rabbit's foot or a girlfriend's photograph. In December 1944, in the frozen hell of the Ardennes, that compass would prove its worth in ways no one, least of all Levi Kincaid, could have imagined. By mid-December, Levi's engineer platoon had been attached to a composite force from the 106th Infantry Division, a unit so new to combat that half its officers still carried fresh creases in their uniforms. Their position was supposed to be a quiet sector, a place to hold the line while veteran divisions rested and refitted for the final push into Germany. Then the world exploded. On the morning of December 16th, German artillery turned the forest into an inferno. Shells screamed down in cascades, shredding trees, collapsing foxholes, severing communication wires. When the barrage lifted, Panzer columns rolled forward through the smoke, their steel hulls painted white for winter camouflage, their commanders standing in open hatches scanning for targets. Behind the tanks came waves of German infantry, Volksgrenadiers and SS men, advancing with the confidence of soldiers who believed they were winning. American units crumbled. Some fought and died. Others scattered into the woods. Orders became rumors. Rumors became panic. In the chaos, Levi's platoon was told to hold a road junction near a narrow bend between Houffalize and Bastogne. The road was unpaved, unnamed, and until that morning strategically meaningless. But now, with German armor pouring through shattered American lines, that nameless road had become valuable terrain. If the Germans took it, they could bypass Bastogne and drive deeper into Allied rear areas. If Levi and his men could hold it, even for a few hours, they might buy time for reinforcements to arrive. But their equipment was pitifully inadequate for the task. They had 157mm M1 anti-tank gun, a weapon designed to stop medium tanks at close range, but nearly useless against the frontal armor of Panthers and Tigers. They had 2 bazookas with limited ammunition. They had a few crates of anti-tank mines. The ground was frozen too hard to dig proper emplacements, so the mines had to be buried shallow under snow, more tripwire than barricade. Their commanding officer, a young lieutenant named Parker Fresh from Officer Candidate School, ordered a textbook defense. Cover the road, plant the mines, pray the Germans send something light. Levi walked the terrain alone. He followed the road with his compass, noting the slope of the ground, the line of sight from the tree line, the angle of the curve. He saw what Parker did not. The road bent sharply to the left, just past a thicket of fir trees. Any vehicle coming from the east would have to slow for the turn, and for 5 or 6 seconds as it navigated the curve, its flank would be fully exposed. That was the kill zone. Levi paced it off. He measured the bearing from the ridge, where they could position the anti-tank gun. He cross-referenced his compass reading with the paper map, checking, rechecking. Then he returned to the command post and told Lieutenant Parker he had a different plan. A better plan. A plan most of the men immediately dismissed as insane. Levi stood in front of the canvas tent with the folded map in his hands and snow crusted on his wool jacket. He pointed at the terrain feature on the map, his finger tracing the curve. "There's a bend in the road, sir, bearing 196 degrees southwest from our position. If the Germans take that turn, the lead tank has to show its left side. No choice, sir. That's our shot." Lieutenant Parker frowned, his eyes drifting to the compass Levi held in his other hand, that battered brass toy with the scratched glass face. "You're basing a defensive plan on that thing." Levi met his gaze without flinching. "I'm basing it on terrain, sir. The compass just helps me prove it." Behind Parker, one of the men snorted. Sergeant McKellar muttered, "Captain Compass strikes again." Another private shook his head and said, "This is gonna be rich." But Levi pressed on. He proposed positioning the anti-tank gun not on the road itself, where it would be exposed and vulnerable, but tucked into a low ridge angled toward the bend. He had already measured the sight line. From that position, the gun crew would have a full 5-second window to fire into the flank of the first tank before it cleared the curve. He suggested placing mines not to destroy tanks, but to shape their behavior. If a German tank commander saw evidence of obstacles, he might slow down or shift course, exposing even more of his vehicle's vulnerable side armor. Then came the bait. Levi wanted to stage the scene to look like a hasty American withdrawal. They would leave a burned-out Jeep chassis just past the curve, drag false tire tracks through the snow, hang torn canvas from tree branches like discarded equipment. The goal was to make the Germans believe the road had already been cleared, to encourage them to roll forward quickly without dismounting infantry to scout. It was a trap built on reading human psychology under pressure, and the linchpin of the entire plan was Levi's toy compass, which he had used to measure every angle, verify every approach, align the gun's arc of fire down to the degree. Lieutenant Parker rubbed his unshaven jaw. "It's clever," he admitted, "but it's unorthodox as hell." Levi replied quietly, "So is fighting Panzers with 1 gun and 2 bazookas, sir." Sergeant McKellar grinned despite himself. "Well, if we're gonna die, might as well die creatively." And so, with reluctant approval, Levi's plan was set in motion. The men cursed and joked as they hauled the anti-tank gun into position through knee-deep snow, as they arranged the decoy and smoothed the false tracks, as they placed the mines with frozen fingers. But beneath the gallows humor, something had shifted. They had a plan. It might be crazy, but it was something to believe in. And in war, belief is half the battle. The afternoon light faded early, swallowed by clouds and trees. The temperature dropped further. Breath hung in the air like smoke. The men worked in silence, their movements deliberate, every sound muffled by snow. Levi checked his compass for the 10th time. The bearing was still perfect. 196 degrees. The anti-tank gun crew struggled to position their weapon on the ridge, its wheels catching on frozen ruts, its breech covered with a blanket to prevent icing. The sergeant grumbled about frostbite and cursed the lack of proper camouflage netting. Levi crouched beside the crude firing platform they had carved from snow and dirt using shovels, bayonets, and bare hands. Every minute felt stolen from the Germans, who were surely closing in. Down the road, the decoy took shape. The burned-out Jeep sat at an angle just past the curve, half buried in snow, scorched and abandoned-looking. False tire tracks crisscrossed the road. A strip of canvas hung from a low branch like a forgotten signal flag, visible from a tank's perspective but too far away to inspect. The bazooka teams took positions behind a thicket, their job simple but terrifying. Wait for the second tank to try reversing or maneuvering, then aim for the treads. Disable it. Stop the column cold. At midnight, Levi walked the setup one final time. The sky was the color of iron. Visibility had dropped to 30 feet in places, perfect for concealment but brutal for nerves. He returned to his position behind the gun crew and pulled out the compass. The glass was fogged. He wiped it clean with his sleeve and watched the needle wobble, then steady. Someone whispered behind him, still trusting that toy Levi. He did not answer. There was no nide. Then, far off in the darkness, came the sound they had all been waiting for. A deep, grinding roar metal against frozen earth, like thunder wrapped in chains. Tank engines. They were coming. The world had narrowed to sound. Not sight, not movement, just sound. And that sound was growing louder, deeper, closer. The grinding rumble of Panzer engines echoed through the forest, bouncing off frozen trees, pressing down on the men like a physical weight. Levi lay flat behind the 57mm gun, his cheek against the cold metal of the gun shield. Beside him, the loader clutched an armor-piercing shell against his chest, knuckles white inside his gloves. No one spoke. No one moved. Behind them, the bazooka team was hidden in the thicket, invisible against the snow. The mines were covered. The decoy was set, and Levi still held the compass in his left hand, though he no longer needed it. He knew the bearing by heart. 196 degrees southwest. That was the angle where death would appear. Then he saw it, just a shape at first, large and grey, emerging from the fog like a ghost made solid. The snow swirled around it, clinging to its sides, softening its edges. But there was nothing soft about a Panzer Roman IV. 25 tons of steel, a 75 main gun, armor thick enough to shrug off rifle fire and machine gun bullets. It moved slowly, deliberately, its tracks churning through the snow, its commander visible in the open turret hatch, scanning ahead with binoculars. Behind it came a second tank, then a third. Exactly as Levi had predicted. His throat tightened, his fingers flexed involuntarily. He glanced at Sergeant McKellar, who nodded once and mouthed, "Wait." The lead tank rolled toward the bend. As it began to curve left, its entire left flank tilted outward, turning into full view of Levi's position. The geometry was perfect. The moment was unfolding exactly as he had mapped it, exactly as he had measured it with that stupid toy compass. But it was not geometry anymore. It was real men inside that steel hull, a real gun that could swing toward them at any second. The turret was not rotating. The German commander was focused ahead, looking at the burned-out jeep, the false tracks, the torn canvas hanging from the tree. He was falling for it. No dismount, no scouting team, no hesitation. The tank kept rolling. The flank was fully exposed now, a grey expanse of riveted steel plate angled perfectly for penetration. Behind the lead tank, the second vehicle crawled forward, still on the straight part of the road, not yet in the trap. Levi raised his left hand. It hovered in the cold air. The loader whispered, "Ready." The gunner's finger tightened on the trigger. His lips moved silently, say when. But Levi did not drop his hand yet. He waited. 1 second, 2. He watched the spacing, calculated the emotional rhythm of the moment. The Germans believed the road was clear. They were not expecting a fight. If Levi fired too early, the angle might be wrong. The shell might ricochet. If he waited too long, the opportunity would vanish. The road belonged to him, but only for a heartbeat. Then he dropped his hand. The shot ripped the silence apart. The 57 gun recoiled violently, the noise a thunderclap that echoed off the frozen trees. The shell screamed forward through the mist and slammed into the Panzer's side, low near the engine deck. A flash of sparks, a screech of twisting metal. The tank shuddered. Steam erupted from the rear vents. The turret jerked violently, swinging toward the tree line, but too late. One track ground to a halt while the other kept turning, spinning the tank sideways across the road. It was disabled. For a moment, the forest held its breath. Then chaos erupted. The loader was already feeding another shell into the breach. The gunner adjusted his aim. Levi shouted, "Fire again." The second round struck just below the turret, punching a jagged crater into the armor plating. Something inside exploded, not the ammunition, but something vital. The hatches flew open. The German commander bailed out first, tumbling into the snow, clutching his ribs. Another crewman followed, helmet gone, face smeared with blood and soot. Levi raised his hand. "Hold fire. They are bailing." But behind the lead tank, the second Panzer was already reacting. Its turret swung wildly, searching for the ambush. Its machine gun opened up, spraying bullets into the tree line. Snow and bark exploded. One round pinged off the gun shield, sending hot metal fragments across Levi's cheek. The bazooka team answered. A soft thump, then a whoosh, then a metallic crack. The second tank lurched as the rocket struck its front tread, shearing it off. The vehicle spun uselessly, one track gone, the other spinning in the snow. 2 German tanks stopped cold in less than 90 seconds, all because of a compass, a bend in the road, and a man who had refused to be laughed off. The German survivors began to surrender. The commander from the first tank knelt in the snow, both arms raised, his face pale and bruised. One of the American privates, A 19-year-old from Missouri named Dale, whose best friend had died at the Siegfried Line, had his rifle up, finger on the trigger, shaking with rage. "I got him," he hissed. "Let me." Levi grabbed the barrel of Dale's rifle and pushed it down. "No." No. The German commander was trembling, his lips moving in broken English. "No shoot, bitte, please." Levi stared at him. The man was young, no more than 23. A boy in a different uniform. For a long moment, no one moved. The flames hissed. The snow fell. Then Levi stepped back. Other Americans emerged from their positions. One carried rope. Another carried bandages. The second tank crew was pulled from the wreck. 2 were alive. 1 was not. Levi never learned their names, but he remembered the look on that tank commander's face, the raw, naked fear, the disbelief that he had expected death and received restraint instead. That restraint was not part of any plan. It was not drawn on any map. It was not aligned with any compass. But it may have been the most precise decision Levi Kincaid made that day. By sunrise, the smell of burning oil and diesel had settled into the snow. The 2 wrecked tanks sat crooked on the narrow road, blackened and steaming, their hulls slowly frosting over as the cold reclaimed them. They blocked the entire lane, front and back, like 2 dead animals stretched across a mountain pass. Nothing was getting through. Levi stood on the ridge, the compass still in his hand. His gloves were soaked. His lips were cracked. He had not spoken much since the fight. None of them had. Sergeant McKellar finally broke the silence. "Well, Compass," he muttered, "I think your stupid idea just bought us a hell of a lot of time." He was right. According to intelligence reports gathered later, the narrow road Levi's platoon had defended was part of a critical supply route the Germans had planned to use for a supporting element moving toward Bastogne. But now the road was completely blocked. It would take at least 6 hours to clear, longer if engineers could not be spared. The next viable detour was a winding mountain route to the north, already jammed with supply trucks and fuel convoys. In war, momentum is a weapon, and what Levi Kincaid had done with 1 gun, 1 compass, and a handful of half-frozen men was break that momentum at the knees. Reports came in by radio. Another American squad half a mile west had trapped a column of German half-tracks with mines and felled trees, delaying them another 3 hours. Somewhere else, paratroopers from the 101st Airborne had held a crossroads longer than expected. These delays stacked like bricks in a wall. Hours became a day. A day became enough time for reinforcements to arrive. The German plan had depended on crossing the Meuse River by day 4. It was now day 5. They were behind schedule. In the chaos of the Ardennes, small moments rarely made headlines. No newspaper would ever read, "Private with toy compass stops Panzer column." But in the operations log of the division's rear headquarters, 1 sentence was typed that afternoon by a junior officer. "Enemy armor delayed at road junction Whiskey 12. Status impassable. Fire damage confirmed. Friendly engineers en route." That was all. 1 sentence, but it told the whole story. The night after the ambush, the men built a small fire. They huddled around it, helmets off, shoulders slumped, boots steaming in the snow. Someone passed Levi a can of peaches. Rations were sacred. Fruit was gold. A man did not give up peaches unless it meant something. Levi nodded his thanks. That was enough. One by one, the joke stopped. No more Captain Compass. No more stupid toy. Now it was, "Hey Levi, check the map." Or is this Ridge due east? His name appeared in conversations differently now, not as a punchline but as a reference, as the guy who had known where to dig, where to point, when to wait. Even Lieutenant Parker pulled him aside the next morning. The young officer was red-eyed, his hands shaking from caffeine and stress. He handed Levi a folded piece of paper, a copy of the handwritten action report being sent up the chain. Levi's name was in it. The compass was not, but Levi did not care. The respect did not come just from what he had done. It came from how he had done it. No boasting, no "I told you so." Just quiet work, careful planning, nerve under pressure. And when the moment came, he took the shot. In a war filled with chaos, that kind of clarity was rare. It made people listen. Levi still kept the compass tucked inside his coat. He did not flash it around. But more than once, another man would glance at it when Levi pulled out his map, and not one of them laughed, because they all knew that stupid idea had saved all their lives. The Battle of the Bulge would rage for 6 brutal weeks, more than 89,000 American casualties, over 800 tanks lost, hundreds of square miles of forest fought over inch by inch, tree by tree. It was the largest and bloodiest battle the United States would fight in World War II, and it turned not all at once but in pieces. By late December, the German advance had already begun to stall, not because of one massive defeat, but because of dozens, maybe hundreds of small delays. Frozen bridges blown before tanks could cross, roadblocks that held half a day longer than they should have, a few men with a single anti-tank gun forcing an armored column to detour. Levi's ambush was one of those delays. The blocked road near Hufeleis created a chain reaction. The 5th Panzer Army, already low on fuel and pressed for time, had to reroute a key supporting element through a narrower mountain path. That path became congested. Fuel trucks got stuck. Artillery support fell behind. The timetable broke, and once the Germans lost momentum, they never regained it. American reinforcements, led by General George Patton's Third Army, broke through snow and chaos to relieve Bastogne. Air support returned when the skies cleared. By early January, the Germans were retreating, their hopes of reaching Antwerp in ruins. Historians often focus on the grand sweep of war, divisions and arrows on maps, but those arrows bend around moments like Levi's. Because tanks cannot move through trees, roads cannot be rebuilt overnight, and even the strongest offensive will choke if you steal its time. That is what Levi Kincaid did. He did not destroy a German army. He did not take a hill or plant a flag. He just pointed a compass at a bend in a road, waited for a tank to show its side and fired. And that made all the difference between a panzer moving forward and a panzer burning in the snow. That compass became something more than a navigational tool. It became a symbol, though Levi himself would never have used that word. To the men who fought beside him, it represented something fundamental about the American soldier in that war. Improvisation, ingenuity, the refusal to be bound by what you were supposed to have or supposed to do. The German army in 1944 was a formidable fighting force, disciplined and experienced, equipped with some of the finest tanks and weapons the war had seen. But it was also an army built on rigid doctrine, on following orders from above, on trusting the plan even when the plan was failing. The Nazi regime that commanded it was authoritarian to its core, demanding obedience, punishing initiative, viewing soldiers as cogs in a machine. The American army was different, not better in every way, not more experienced or better equipped in those early days of the Bulge, but different in a way that mattered. American soldiers, many of them farm boys and mechanics and shopkeepers, had grown up in a culture that valued problem-solving, that rewarded individual initiative, that believed a man with a good idea should be heard regardless of his rank. Democracy is not just a system of government. It is a way of thinking. It is the belief that solutions can come from anywhere, that every voice has potential value, that rigid hierarchy is not always strength. In the frozen forests of Belgium, that democratic instinct, that willingness to listen to a private with a toy compass, became a weapon as powerful as any tank. Levi's compass did not just point north. It pointed toward a deeper truth, that freedom, real freedom, is not just about what you are fighting for. It is about how you fight. It is about trusting men to think, to adapt, to improvise when the plan falls apart. German commanders, bound by doctrine and fear of Hitler's wrath, often hesitated to deviate from orders even when circumstances demanded it. American commanders, for all their faults, were more willing to listen, to trust, to let a good idea rise regardless of where it came from. That flexibility, that democratic chaos, was what the Germans found so difficult to predict and counter. It was not recklessness. It was the opposite. It was a system that allowed men like Levi Kincaid to use their minds as weapons. After the war, Levi went home quietly. He returned to Maine, to the mill town where he had grown up. He worked in land management, mapping forests and property lines. He married once, had no children. He kept the compass in a drawer beside his bed until the day he died. It was scratched, slightly bent, and still worked. He never told many people the full story. not out of shame, but because for men like Levi, surviving was enough. The ones who talked the loudest usually had not seen the worst of it. But one thing stayed with him, not the gunfire, not even the burning tanks, but that moment in the snow when the German soldier dropped to his knees and raised his hands, when Levi could have pulled the trigger but did not. That was the choice he remembered most. Because war is not just about who shoots first. It is about who thinks clearly in the moment between fear and instinct. And sometimes the most powerful weapon on the battlefield is not the rifle. It is restraint. It is reason. It is the refusal to become what you are fighting against. The compass Levi carried was more than brass and glass. It was a reminder that direction matters, that precision and thought can triumph over brute force, that a free mind is a dangerous thing to an enemy who demands only obedience. In the end, the Battle of the Bulge was not won by grand strategy alone. It was won by thousands of small decisions made by men who refused to give up, who adapted and improvised and fought with whatever they had. Men who understood, consciously or not, that the values they were defending, freedom, democracy, the dignity of the individual, were not abstract ideals but practical tools for survival. Levi Kincaid's toy compass stopped 2 Panzers on a nameless road in Belgium. But what it really did was prove that in war, as in life, it is not always the strongest or the best equipped who prevail. Sometimes it is the one who thinks clearly, who trusts his own judgment, who refuses to be told that his idea is too stupid to try. That is the lesson of that compass. That is the lesson of that day. And that is the lesson that echoes across the decades. A reminder that freedom is not just what soldiers fight for, but how they fight and why they win.